My name is Karen Peshek, and I was invited to share a social media post that I posted a couple of years ago around this season. Not only it was about Day of the Dead, but also later in the month in November is my mom's, it would have been her birthday. So I was inspired to write this little post when I took my kids to the Riverfront Park when it just opened and they were playing on that space. So here it is. I see her running up and down this green space, playing with her siblings and her friend, her beautiful long hair floating in the wind and shining in the afternoon sun. And as a good Mexican mom, I imagine my line of ancestral grandmothers cringing at the sight of those loose locks. Because everyone knows that good little Mexican girls wear their hair up in a braid. But she likes her hair down. And it makes me think of a song my mom used to sing when I was little, Pelo Suelto by Gloria Trevi. That's Hair Down by Gloria Trevi. Now, there's one thing you need to know about Gloria Trevi, who at the height of her popularity in the early 90s was a controversial singer for pushing against the rules of behavior and the morality of Mexican society. She was rebellious, and she sang the kinds of songs you didn't want your parents to catch you singing. My mom, a beautiful woman with a tragic life that included suffering domestic abuse at the hands of her partner for many years before her passing about 20 years ago, she could control almost nothing about her life. Still, she sang and danced and introduced 6-year-old me to Gloria Trevi and her inappropriate songs. Pelo Suelto became ingrained in my memory one moment when we were singing and dancing together when Gloria was on Sábado Gigante, a popular Saturday night TV show. We put our hair down and held hands and twirled around the room, laughing and feeling so alive. I think that that moment happened because even when she couldn't control many things, she could control this. She would sing these songs that spoke of fearless authenticity and breaking up with society's expectations, even if she fell short in her actions. When I see Gabby running around so free, her hair floating in the air, she reminds me of the spirit of the woman that she never got to meet. So wear your hair down, my love, and do not let others dictate how you exist in this world and how you want to present yourself. Feel the cool autumn breeze and sing and laugh and be free for those women who rarely got to be. Thank you.
Most of you know me. I'm that guy that plays guitar. My name is Kyle Knapp. This is my father, the Reverend Ronald Wayne Knapp. And I have a few things I wanted to say about him. Ron Knapp was born to a blue-collar family in Kenosha County, Wisconsin in 1934. He went through elementary school in a one-room schoolhouse. When he was 17, he met Ann Duggins at a Youth for Christ meeting and fell in love. On their first date, they were in a car together with another couple when they were struck head-on by a drunk driver crossing the center line. Remember, there were no seat belts in those days. Ann suffered a broken jaw, and her mother ordered that she was never to go out with that young man again. My mom's sitting over here with my son Daniel and my wife Gail and our friend Mark, who's visiting from Boston. Thank you all for being here. So, never to go out with that young man again. And as they continue to make plans for their wedding, Dad began his ministry as a Methodist pastor, serving churches in Hope and Edenville, Michigan at the age of 19. His salary of $1,600 a year was raised to $1,800 when he and Mom married at the ages of 19 and 17. As Dad went on to pastor churches in Rosebush and Battle Creek, Michigan, and later in Anderson and Changewater, New Jersey, all while simultaneously pursuing his seminary training at Drew, he and Mom had 5 kids, of which I was the second. I inherited my love of nature and music from my father. When I was young, vacations consisted of camping. I had no comprehension of the poverty we lived in, that we were too poor to afford real vacations. I didn't mind. I just loved the woods and the mountains and the water and sleeping out under the stars and the songs Dad taught me as we sang in the car and around the campfire, songs like Rock My Soul in the Bosom of Abraham, Michael Row the Boat Ashore, and Kumbaya. Early in his ministry, Dad began to struggle with his faith. A turning point, as he writes in his memoirs, was when he found he could no longer in good conscience recite the Apostles' Creed, as he could no longer believe in a literal resurrection of the body. Eventually, he made the painful decision to leave the Methodist Church and become a Unitarian Universalist. The bishop tried to persuade him to stay. The church needed forward-thinking, progressive, questioning ministers, but Dad was passionate about the need to be true to himself. His first Unitarian appointment was to the Federated Church of Avon, Illinois, a community of about 1,000, around 1965. We lived there about 3 years, and in 1967, I was 10 years old. The civil rights and Vietnam protest movements, Flower Children, and the Summer of Love were all in full swing. And Dad decided that in order to be hip and relevant, he needed to learn to play guitar. So he hired a teacher to come to our home and give him weekly lessons. But learning to play guitar takes patience and years of practice. And my dad, bless his heart, was not a patient man. He gave up after a few weeks. But my older brother, John, surreptitiously listened to Dad's lessons from an adjacent room, quickly picked up the basics, and in turn taught what he'd learned to me. And that's how I became a guitarist. That's the only education I've ever had. For much of his life, and certainly for all of his ministry, Dad was an activist for social justice, civil rights, and women's rights, and was an avid admirer of Dr. Martin Luther King. In April of 1968, Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. Now, I knew who Dr. King was. I'd heard some of his speeches, but at 11, with my carefree, lily-white rural childhood, I had only the most superficial understanding of the magnitude of the struggle that he stood for. But his death was a massive blow to my father, as it was to so many who had looked to him for leadership and hope. A week or so later, Dad took me with him to Peoria to participate in a memorial march. Prior to that time, I had only encountered a handful of black people in my life. Suddenly, I was a tiny white dot in an ocean of tens of thousands of black faces. In a way, this felt like the ending of my childhood and the beginning of growing up. And as the world changed before my eyes, I wept and sang with these strange and beautiful people, knowing I couldn't begin to comprehend the depth of their loss. Just a few months later, all 7 of us were in a car traveling cross country to take a new pulpit in Vermont. On the way, we learned through the car radio of the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. Again, I was too young to really understand how important and awful this news was, but it certainly threw a wet blanket over the excitement of our trip. For my parents, 1968 was a hard year. My family spent the next 6 years in New England, where my dad led Unitarian churches in Claremont, New Hampshire, and Windsor and Ascutney, Vermont. And then in 1976, the family moved to Omaha, where my father served as minister of First Unitarian Church here on 31st and Harney for over 20 years. The church thrived under his leadership, as Dad earned the respect of the liberal religious community for his stand for progressive values, interfaith cooperation, and human rights. He organized an advocacy group to protect vulnerable seniors who suffered abuses in senior care facilities, and successfully lobbied to change laws that had allowed independent seniors to lose all of their family savings and be reduced to poverty when their spouse needed skilled nursing care. He also volunteered regularly at women's reproductive care clinics, serving as an escort, a human barrier between women seeking care and the anti-choice picketers who harassed them. When the picketers learned that my dad was a minister, they called him Minister of Mayhem, and sometimes Pastor Disaster. He wore these monikers as a badge of honor. Sometimes they picketed Sunday morning services as well, once placing a child's casket on the steps of his church. Dad retired from ministry in 1996, but continued to serve as he was able, preaching itinerantly, serving temporary pulpit assignments, leading poetry and literature workshops, and being involved in humanist groups. My dad was extremely well-read, a font of knowledge about the Bible and Christian thought, as well as a wide diversity of other religions and philosophies. A lifelong lover of science, nature, and poetry, he regarded the earth as sacred and poetry as scripture. He published 4 books, including Of Life Immense, The Prophetic Vision of Walt Whitman, and Oneness, Thoughts on a Humanistic Theology of Everything. Many years ago, my dad wrote a sermon and preached it numerous times since, entitled, Why I Am an Atheist. Just a few months ago, I preached in his old pulpit a sermon titled, Why I Still Believe in God. You might think these contrasting messages would put us at odds, but in fact, they brought us closer. Over the last 10 to 15 years of his life, we had many deep conversations about theology and questions of faith. He believed that good religion consisted more in action than in belief, and that curiosity was of greater importance than certainty. In one of his books, he quotes Nietzsche, saying, "If you wish to strive for peace of soul and pleasure, then believe. If you wish to be a devotee of truth, then inquire." 12 days ago, I said goodbye to him as he lay softly snoring in his bed, in the repose from which he would never wake up. I don't know whether he could hear me at all, but in a moment alone with him, I took the opportunity to tell him not to worry. We would look after Mom, and to thank him for the values he'd taught me and the good life he'd given me. I close with these words attributed to Stephen Grellett, which my dad quoted in the last chapter of his published collection of sermons. Quote, "I expect to pass through this world but once. Any good that I can do, or any kindness I can show to any fellow creature, let me do it now. Let me not defer nor neglect it, for I shall not pass this way again." Thank you.